to the 46th meeting of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted in committee on June 11th, 2021, the committee commenced consideration of the study of funding to locate the remains of Indigenous children buried on the grounds of former residential schools. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, both virtual and in person, and pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, the webcasts will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee, and will be available on the House of Commons website. Once again, everybody, that there will be no photos for social media use. So thank you very much for abiding by that. Before we start, I just wanted to make one statement before we commence today's meeting that and this is for all staff. Today's meeting might include some difficult testimony that can affect people in many ways. House employees, including members and their staff, can access support through the administration's nurse counselors at ohs-sst@parle.gc.ca and the Employee and Family Assistance Program at 1-800-663-1142. That's 1-800-663-1142 for the Employee and Family Assistance Program. This information is available on the House of Commons website, or you can follow up with myself or the clerk. That being said, I want to welcome everyone back to this beautiful Friday. And as I said earlier, this is a beautiful Friday, at least in my neck of the woods here on this little land, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq as well as Beothuk. Okay. I want to welcome our guest to start with. First of all, I want to acknowledge the fact that we are dealing with a motion, as I mentioned earlier, from Mr. Waugh, and I thank you for that. Joining us from the Department of Canadian Heritage will be Emmanuel Saljou, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Assistant Deputy Minister, Sport, Major Events and Commemorations. Also from Canadian Heritage, we have Melanie Kwong, Director General, Major Events, Commemorations, and Capital Experience. And also joining us from Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, we have Amanda McCarthy, who is the Director of Resolution and Partnerships. Now, as you know, we start with a statement from our officials. Now, we say as a guideline 5 minutes. I won't be terribly strict about this. We have an hour, perhaps a little bit more than an hour, to do our meeting today, as we will likely do I would like to do 2 rounds of questioning. Can I see a hand as who would like to begin speaking of the department? Hands up, who would like to start? Ms. Kwong, you have the floor, ma'am, for 5 minutes, and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee. And I'd just like to mention that my colleague Emmanuel is having some connection difficulties, so I'll be speaking on her behalf, and I will begin my remarks. Chers membres du comité.
Dear members of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, it is with pleasure that I'm appearing before you today.
On my colleague's behalf, I would like to acknowledge that today I'm speaking to you from the Treaty 7 territory of the Stoney Nakoda Blackfoot Confederacy and as well Métis Region 3 in Alberta. Je suis ici pour vous fournir.
I'm here to provide you with information on funding provided by the Department of Canadian Heritage for activities related to the commemoration of the history and legacy of residential schools.
I would like to acknowledge the committee's support in making the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation a reality. This year, on September 30th, we will mark the first anniversary of this important day that will help ensure that the tragic history and legacy of residential schools are not forgotten and remain a vital component of the reconciliation process. In 2019, the federal budget provided $7 million over 2 years for projects to raise awareness of the history and legacy of residential schools and to honor survivors, families, and communities. The department developed a 2-year strategy. The first year, we funded large-scale national initiatives that have an educational and legacy component. The second year was for community-based projects suited to meet specific needs, histories, and realities.
This funding provided grants and contributions to eligible recipients for initiatives that helped raise awareness on the history and legacy of residential schools, and for activities that enabled communities to recognize, commemorate, and honor survivors, their families, and communities.
Pour cette initiative.
Interest in this special initiative was remarkable, with over 350 applications totaling $14 million in requested funding despite the challenges caused by the pandemic.
Entre 2010
Between 2019 and 2021, overall, 7 national events and 203 community projects were funded. Here are some examples of eligible projects: healing gardens, ceremonies, healing workshops, elder presentations, speaker series, commemorative plaques and monuments, educational and awareness material, and cultural and artistic initiatives.
These numbers show the interest and need for this type of commemorative activity and funding to support them. I'm happy to report that Budget 2021 made the funding announced in Budget 2019 permanent, with $13.4 million over the next 5 years and $2.4 million in ongoing support. The department will be engaging Indigenous groups, survivor organizations, and communities to determine how best to allocate funds. It is critical to engage to ensure this funding best meets the needs of Indigenous communities and that we adhere to the principle of nothing about us without us. Parallèlement à cette
In parallel with this national engagement, the department will collaborate with national organizations for large-scale commemorative events in 2021 that will continue to raise awareness regarding the history and ongoing legacy that I mentioned.
Specifically on the Paths to Healing project. Just some points of clarification. The Tk'emlúps de Secwepemc received a $40,000 grant for a project they called Paths to Healing. This was in the context of the funding that I mentioned previously that was announced in 2019. The objective of the program was to commemorate the history and legacy of residential schools and to honor survivors, their families, and communities. The project submitted by the community was in fact for the creation of a permanent memorial site and included improvements such as benches, plants, gardens, and paths within the existing heritage park. It also included commemorative events centered around Orange Shirt Day. The use of the ground penetrating radar technology was one of the measures taken as part of the development of this initiative. In effect, one can say that the Canadian Heritage Funding contributed to the identification of the remains. However, this find was not the original intended specific purpose of the project.
Other federal departments, such as Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, have their own initiatives that address certain calls of action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, which relate to their specific mandates. In the specific case of missing children and burials, the Department of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada is the lead for calls to action 74 to 76. This concludes my opening remarks. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Ms. Kwong. Appreciate that. I notice Ms. Sajou was able to join us. I think she's there right now. Ms. Sajou, can you please say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself in order to get that sound check?
Yes, bonjour. Je m'excuse.
Hello, I'm very sorry. I'm Emmanuelle Sajou, Assistant Deputy Minister at Canadian Heritage.
And major event. Nice to be here today. Thank you.
Okay. And it appears that your sound should be okay. Oh, she was already sound checked. Okay, very good.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I lost my connection. Sorry.
Trust me, you're not the first one to say that, and you're probably not going to be the last one either. But I do appreciate you coming on for this important discussion. And now, folks, for those of you unfamiliar, perhaps you're watching us through webcast. Those were our opening statements. We now go to the round of questioning from our colleagues. We are going to start with the Conservative Party and the man who brought us this motion, Mr. Kevin Waugh. Mr. Waugh, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests. This has been a particularly hard time in our country, and I felt it very important to bring department officials forward to speak about the paths of healing and the situation in Kamloops. So when I look at the Kamloops, when Heritage did give the $40,000 grant, part of it was for the ground penetrating radar that did identify 215 grave sites. My other question is, how many other residential schools in this country have applied for the grant and the GPR? And I know my province of Saskatchewan is actively involved right now, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But from the Kamloops story, how many now have contacted the Heritage Department requesting funding for the GPR?
Yes, thank you. Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
In les remarques d'introduction,
as you heard in the opening remarks, the objective of Canadian Heritage's commemorative program was to raise awareness among Canadians about the history of residential schools and to lend itself to positive reconciliation. So the goal of this project was really to raise awareness, to foster education and promotion. In this initiative, we received over 350 requests for funding, and Heritage Canada funded 302 projects up to $3.5 million, and the Kamloops community received $40,000 for an initiative, and that was for the creation of a healing garden. Inaudible for the interpreter. And it is as part of that project that they made those remarkable discovery. But the original intended objective was for a healing garden for that funding. I will now hand it over to my colleague. She can give you more details on the number of communities who submitted a request for a radar. Over to you, Mandy.
Hello, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here. At this moment, I can say that we've received over 70 requests for more information about the funding envelope. We've provided them with the necessary information for them to access the funding. At this point, we've not received more than 10 proposals as communities work through this very difficult tragedy and listen to their communities and their survivors about the best approach to move forward. We're here to offer our support and the resources when survivors, their organizations, and communities are ready.
Thank you. The concern I have now, and we've got lots in Saskatchewan where I come from, the Battleford Industry School. I mean, we've got the Star Blanket Cree Nation. We have so many in our province now that is going to reach out. But there was a story in the CBC that now certain organizations want to rent these ground penetrating radar and kind of go to the First Nations, the Indigenous groups in my province and others, and kind of say, look, we have the expertise. And in fact, I see SNC-Lavalin has offered their services to many in Saskatchewan and to others in this country. So I'm a little worried about the scam aspect of this, because you need really expertise in the ground penetrating radar and how to operate it and identify it. And CBC has done a very good story on the scams that are coming forward. And I'm very worried that this is going to overtake what really should be happening. Access to funds either from INAN or from Heritage, and do it properly, because if it isn't done properly, this is going to be another disaster in this country. Any thoughts on that?
Maybe Mandy, because this is more your mandate of your department, you want to answer?
Yes, thank you for that. We engaged with over 150 participants during summer and fall of 2020, and we overwhelmingly heard that the approach that Canada should take should be able to facilitate access to resources, but the project should be community-led and informed by survivors. We're currently reaching out with colleagues and other professionals to start the conversation about how to provide a sense of guidance on penetrating radar that communities can access to enable them to make informed decisions.
So I sat on INAN for 2 years, and the money supposedly was there, as you've talked about, 33 million over 3 years, and there's still 27 million left. And I heard the testimony from the National Center of Truth and Reconciliation. They've received $2.6 million to develop and maintain a student death register, but they say the money is not flowing. And I would agree with them. The program started in 2019 with 33 plus million, and we've only seen 3 or 4 million out. So what is the issue here that we still have 27 million available 2 years later? What is the issue that we're seeing in this country and the departments?
Thank you very much for your question, sir. We wanted to make sure that we engaged with survivor organizations, Indigenous leaders, with health practitioners, with archaeologists, and we did that engagement over the summer or fall of last year. We had delays due to the pandemic, and we supported the communities in identifying what their priorities were for them to support their communities and members during that difficult time. We completed the engagement in November of 2020, and as you're aware, we now have the 27.1 million available.
Thank you, Ms. McCarthy. Thank you, Mr. Waugh. We're now going to Mr. Batiste, who's not a regular member of our committee, but is special guesting today, and with his expertise, we certainly welcome. Thank you, sir. Your name of your riding, I know it's Cape Breton, and I know Sydney's in it, but I forgot the official name.
Sydney Victoria. Mr.
Sydney
Chair.
Victoria, I should know that. Nevertheless, you have 6 minutes, sir. Go ahead.
Yes, and I want to thank the Heritage Committee for giving me some time today to talk about this really important issue. And I've heard some of the members and some of the discussion talk about the need to raise awareness and commemorate in Indian residential schools. And I'd really like to just start off by looking at some of the work that we've done as a government. And, yesterday we were lucky enough to see a vote on Bill C-15 on UNDRIP, which was mentioned 7 times in the TRC calls to action, as well as important work that we've done in terms of establishing a language commissioner just last week, as well as the TRC calls to action, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And we're taking a lot of big steps in government in terms of fulfilling the calls to action. But across the country, there were 130 different residential schools. And in a lot of these places, there is no commemoration, there is no plaque, there's nothing. In Nova Scotia, the only residential school we had in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, there's a farm there, and there's nothing there to commemorate all of the children whose lives were lost and all of the communities that had to go there. And so I'm wondering if you could talk to me a little bit about the 27 million that our government has put towards ensuring that we move forward on calls to action, but also why it's important that these processes be Indigenous-led and not government-led, community-based, and based on survivors of the residential schools that are very different from across Canada. And I just want you to speak to that a bit.
Alors, pour commencer,
To begin, the 2019 budget did allocate 7 million over 2 years to Canadian Heritage towards residential schools, and the objective was to increase the awareness.
to honor the memory of the residential school survivor, the families and the communities, and to provide also an opportunity for survivor to talk about this dark period of our history. En 2021,
in 2021,
able to get 13.4 million over 5 years. So now we have ongoing 2.4 million a year to continue on this path and to commemorate the legacy of residential school. So now I will turn to Mandy. Maybe you can talk about your own call to action and what you're doing on your side.
My apologies, Mr. Chair. I was disconnected for a couple of minutes, so I'm not sure that I heard everything that was presented, but I did catch the fact that you were interested in hearing what the 27.1 million was for. Am I correct in that?
Yes, if you can speak to
Yes.
that and what we're doing in our commemoration.
Okay, yes, no, I can speak to you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the 27.1 million is the funding available that's now available from the 33.8 million, specifically targeted for call to action 74 to 76. The funding is dedicated to supporting Indigenous communities and survivors organizations and their partners in locating, documenting, maintaining, and commemorating burial sites associated with former residential schools, and responding to family wishes to commemorate and memorialize their losses and the children's final resting places.
Okay. If that's all, I wanted to touch a little bit about education, and we're talking a little about commemoration. We're talking about raising awareness. A lot of the education components of moving forward on the calls to action provinces and federal collaboration. I'm wondering, with the Truth and Reconciliation Day of September 30th, can you talk a little bit about what are the opportunities that exist around heritage, about how we can create more awareness and education around the truth and around the Indian residential schools? Feel free, anyone, to chime in.
I'm sorry, the connection is very not good on my side. I'm not sure I understood the whole question.
Okay. Sorry, I noticed, there were some people, sorry, it's the chair again. I just paused your time, Monsieur Baptiste. Okay, so I'm not sure if everyone can hear. I'll interrupt if need be, but Mr. Baptiste, do you want to reiterate the last part of what you said so that everyone can understand? And I'll start the clock accordingly. Go ahead.
Okay, how can we in Canada, with our provincial governments, create more awareness and education around the Indian residential school?
Is that for Madame Sajou? Oh, we lost her, I think. Yeah, it seems we've lost Madame Sajou. Okay. Would others with us like to take those questions we have her back. Madame Sajou, welcome back. You're on mute, man. There you go.
I'm sorry, I'm really having a problem today with my internet. Melanie, can you take the question?
Sure. In terms of education for the National Day, we look forward to the first opportunity this year for the now that we have the confirmation of the statutory holiday, to work with organizations nationally, but also to engage to see where we can all work together on this important day, using some of the work that we've done to date in terms of commemorating a number of projects. We are continuing to work with contacts across the country, so we look forward to continuing to build on the success to date. With respect to the provinces, as you mentioned, there is a component for education, and we will explore all avenues to be able to see how we can best work together on that.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Baptiste. Yes.
No, I was just wondering if I had any time left. I just knew there were some difficulties there, but
yeah, we have a few seconds. If you want a quick question for the end, please proceed.
Can you just expand a bit about what the 2.4 million in permanent funding coming from Heritage will address when it comes to commemoration?
Just because of connection issues, I'll start, and then if Emmanuel wants to add, if that's all right. So what the 2.4 million offers is that ongoing funding, which we're very happy to know will be existing, that we will be able to continue on the 2-year funding that was initially announced. So again, building off of the work that's been done to date, I think there's more work to be done in terms of that the national piece. When it was mentioned earlier that the funding announced in 2019 allowed us to do a 2-year plan where we did a kind of a national focus in the first year and then a number of community-based projects in the second year. Our focus will now be on engaging, just as my colleague Amanda McCarthy said, with the organizations and representatives that will be most using the funding now that we have that permanency, to see how best we can use those funds. So that will be the approach. Thank you.
Sorry, if you hear me say thank you, you can finish your sentence. I'm not that strict over time. It's a very important subject for me to be cutting things off like that. So thank you, Ms. Kwong. Just a couple things. Ms. McCarthy, could you raise your mic up just a little bit so we could hear you? There's been some issues with that. Also, we've had some internet issues with Ms. Sajou again. Perhaps, Ms. Sajou, if you want, you could turn off your camera to give us a more secure sound when you do. That's no reflection on you, of course. It's just, it gives us a better connection when you're able to testify. So I thank you for your patience, everyone. Prochaine.
Up next, we have Ms. Sylvie Bérubé from the Bloc Québécois. Ms. Bérubé, welcome. She's a member for Abitibi, Bay James, Nunavik, AU. Welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You have 6 minutes. Please go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I am on the traditional territory of the Cree Anishinaabe territory in my riding here in Quebec. Inaudible for the interpreter. A pleasure for me to participate, and welcome to all witnesses. Here's my question. What is the plan for the government moving forward? We know about the Indigenous remains found. There are many residential schools, former residential schools all around Canada, including in Quebec. Really, I want to know what your action plan is to help Indigenous communities. I will ask my colleague from CERNAC to answer. Amanda?
Hello, thank you very much. I'll try it with the video on, but I'll turn off if I'm signaled that people can't hear me clearly. The funding was 27.1 million was announced in order to support the implementation of Call to Action 74 to 76. It is accessible to Indigenous organizations, communities, and survivor organizations. We are waiting to hear from Indigenous voices on how they would like us best to proceed. The plan at this point is for Canada to be a facilitator of access to the support and the resources, to obstacles to providing that support, and listening from them on how they would like to proceed.
Justement, quand on parle des 27 millions de dollars.
Regarding the 27 million, when it comes to investigations on the sites of former schools, we know that there was a blockage, and we know that the government has been in power for 6 years, and the Prime Minister says that reconciliation is a priority for him, but why are things not moving, and why is action taken so late?
Thank you for the question. We invited over 200 organizations, and approximately 150 participate in a national virtual engagement last summer and fall in 2020. We wanted to hear from parts on the best way to proceed. With the COVID pandemic, we suffered some delays there, giving communities the time and the space to take the preparations they needed within their communities to address the pandemic. And then we received all of our authorities for us to proceed. And now the 27.1 million in funding is available. We understand that this is an initial investment that we may need to consider additional resourcing or sourcing in the future. At this point, we're listening to Indigenous voices to determine the scope, the interest, and the how we should proceed.
Aussi, comment se fait-il aussi que le financement?
Also, how is it that the funding allocated to the discovery of these 215 children, inaudible for the interpreter, why didn't the government commit to funding initiatives to discover these sites?
Je sais pas si Amanda, do you want to answer this one?
My apologies. Could you please repeat the question?
Oui, assurément.
Yes, certainly. So the funding allocated to the discovery of the 215 Indigenous children in Kamloops first came from the British Columbia government, but didn't the federal government also commit to finding burial sites?
Si je peux,
if I may, when it comes to the Take Kamloops case, the Canadian Heritage Funds were originally meant for a healing garden. And it was in the context of creating that healing garden that a radar device was obtained to create that healing garden. And it was when they were creating the healing garden that they stumbled across the gravesite. So $40,000 that did come from Heritage Canada directly helped that project. Thank you. In December, I received a question to one of my written questions regarding the achievement of calls to action 81 to 82. We're now told that only 0.5 full-time equivalent positions were assigned to contribute to the achievement of call to action 82. I will put the question to you. Don't you think that it is insufficient to achieve that call to action? I can begin, and then I will give the floor to my colleague, Mélanie. It was call to action 81 that dealt with the creation of monuments in Ottawa to pay homage to survivors and to residential schools. And we have a whole team that is dedicated to the creation of monuments. So I'm not sure, the 0.5, I'm not sure about that number. Mélanie, could you add something? Well, I was just wondering if I could get clarification. I would check and see about that project, but I would also like to give an update on call to action 81. If this is a good time to do it regarding monuments. We certainly wish to continue work on that project. There have already been a number of discussions with key stakeholders to determine what the vision is for the monument so that we may proceed to next steps.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Up next, we have the NDP. We have Bienvenue encore.
Welcome once again, Mr. Boulris from Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Is that right? That's perfect. Thank you. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being with us this afternoon for this vital and fundamental matter. And I have 2 comments right off the bat. Of course, in the discovery of 215 bodies of children, students at the Kamloops residential school, this shook all politicians and all Canadians. And I think that this was a human proof of a colossal tragedy that took place over decades. Many victims were buried without their parents even being informed. It was a shock in Ottawa. The flags are still at half-mast. There are still flowers and toys left at the monument, and I would like to thank my colleague, Mr. Kevin Waugh, for having tabled this motion. However, unfortunately, action doesn't always follow fine words. And this is not a question for you, but I just want to have this on the record. I find that it is extremely regrettable because Nikki Ashton had asked earlier today for the House of Commons unanimous consent for the creation of an independent body to carry out research and check if there are any other unmarked grave sites. And we know that there are, other than at the Kamloops School. And it would also have enabled more funds to facilitate research. But unfortunately, that motion was refused, including by certain government members. I find that extremely regrettable. I won't ask you to answer that question because it is more political, but I have a question perhaps for Ms. Kwong. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission contains numerous calls to action. 64, 65, or 74, 75, and 76 have not been completed by the federal government. When do you think the timeline for that will be? Thank you very much for the question. Given that my colleague Amanda has that mandate, I will ask her to respond. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's difficult to say at this time, as we're still listening to Indigenous voices as they go through this recent tragedy. As I mentioned, it's the role of government to facilitate the access to the resources, but when requested, when people are ready, and this is not something that we wish to rush, we need to make sure that we do it right. We need to make sure that it's survivors who are leading and informing the decisions. And so it's difficult to say at this time what the timeline would be, other than to say that that Canada is here and it's ready to support and to provide those resources.
Okay. Je comprends votre...
Okay, I understand your point of view and the nature of your responsibilities, but that is not very clear. Unfortunately, it is still quite vague. But Mr. Batiste asked a good question. Inaudible for the interpreter. I remember being in first or second grade, and the government is not the same today, but there was some mention of the tragedy of residential schools when I was growing up. And I find it's something that we learned about late. I know that there's been a revision of the guide for new Canadians, and the reality of residential schools is laid out more clearly in there. But beyond that, what do you plan to do in cooperation with the provinces, as Mr. Batiste was asking, to be able to tell that tragic story so that Canadians and Quebecers are aware of what happened, much more aware than what we were in the past? It feels like over the past decades, a blind eye was turned.
Comme je le mentionnais un peu,
as I mentioned earlier, the funding we obtained in the 2019 budget and in 2021, the goal of our project is to raise awareness and to honor survivors and their family and to help survivors tell their stories in the healing process. There is also funding that can be allocated to education initiatives, to awareness-raising initiatives, including presentations, traveling presentations, monuments, plaques, or ceremonies or community events. So there are multiple ways and multiple tools at our disposal to ensure that this story, this history is told.
Et dans votre programme,
when it comes to your program for commemoration of these historic events, I would like to understand the process better. And how are you working together with Indigenous organizations and with their leadership so that this is done not only for them, but with and by them?
Emmanuel, je peux peut-être...
Emmanuel, perhaps I can answer this question. So if I may, that is exactly the way we must proceed. And we have gained experience through the 200 programs and projects that I mentioned across the country. What worked well, what can be improved upon, and what are the requests and the needs. Specifically regarding education, many projects funded by Heritage Canada were done alongside Indigenous communities. For example, the creation of books.
Okay, merci. Merci, Monsieur Bourris.
Thank you, Mr. Bourris.
Go to our second round. Mr. Shields, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the department officials being here with us today on this very, very important topic. Just a couple of comments in the sense that as a fifth-generation family in Southern Alberta, very familiar with Treaty 7 and the Blackfoot Confederation. As we grew up going to school with, grew up knowing residential schools. My mother actually taught in a residential school. So this is something familiar with. I have met with many elders as some of those people I grew up with. I have met with clans, clan leaders, hereditary chief, and elders who have survived residential schools. And I have been to grave sites, marked and unmarked, in my writing. It's probably a history that some of us are very familiar with. So when we see the $33 million and only 27 million spent, or on not 27 million spent, you sort of wonder, why? Is there confusion? Is it a program that's been silent? I was on the Heritage Committee when we did the National Day of Recognition. A lot of discussion about that one. And again, probably some of the concerns I said about it. It's a federally organization regulated. It's not a statutory holiday for everybody. So we've got a problem with that one in itself because it doesn't apply to everybody in our country. When we talk about that day of recognition, my question was often, are you putting this on the shoulders without any supports to Indigenous people? Where is the connection to the rest of society and whose onus is going to carry this? The school system, how are they going to do it? You mentioned the book. In a sense, I mentioned that book should have been written and distributed everywhere in the country. So I think we've got lots of problems here in the sense of where we're going forward. Our national art here, 2 Indigenous people employed, the government hired. And I met with them and I said, there was a play written about reconciliation to do with Siksika and the First Nations by the Strathmore High School. It was viewed in a number of places. It's a phenomenal play. But I said, that's the kind of play that it should be in Ottawa at the National Arts Centre. And they said, we were given no money. We were just hired, but we have no money to bring things for people. So I think we've got a huge challenge here in the sense of, one, confusion on who can get the money and how. Two, it's directed, I think, at Indigenous to carry the load on this, which I think is problematic. We're putting it back in the wrong place, and we need to have a different way because provinces do education. And so, anyways, I've rambled, but from the department officials, any response to the concerns that I have going forward on this?
I might just start with there was a lot of information. I hope I can touch on most of the pieces there, Mr. Shields. And I'm glad you mentioned your experiences, because again, in perhaps using this example from the funding that Canadian Heritage has been able to provide, just exactly when I speak about a book, I'm just looking at just to make sure I have the name of it right. Part of the funding was to support the Piikani Indian Residential School Interviews Project, for example, and it's those local projects that includes often commemorative programming, includes often a component for Orange Shirt Day that we saw in these 200 projects, which does have the ability to be able to join some of the recognition and commemoration piece with activities as well that are happening. So I think what we've seen with these 200 projects, again, this was the second year of the 2-year funding, is we have an opportunity to learn from what's happened here, take, as my colleague Amanda has said, the feedback that we're getting in terms of the Indigenous voices about what we can do with this money to best and what we can still need to do, but a lot we can learn from what's been done.
And when you said it was a statutory holiday, it's a statutory holiday for federal and federal regulated. We got a problem right off the bat in a sense of how that's going to be viewed and worked with, because provinces don't do that.
One of
the objectives of that day was to resemble Remembrance Day on November 11th. The opportunity was to have students at school during that day. So it was an opportunity to also carry out education on that day across the country, to explain why that day is important, to explain what happened in residential schools. So the model chosen for the day will be modeled on November 11th.
Well, Remembrance Day in Western
you,
Canada
Mr.
is a statutory holiday, not in the rest of the country.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. Appreciate that. Ms. Ian, you have 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much, and so appreciate the witnesses that have joined us here today. And I want to thank as well my colleague, Mr. Waugh, for bringing this very, very important issue forward. There seems to be a theme here today, and that is education or the lack thereof. Why didn't we know? It lent to the shock that everybody seemed to be in. I want to talk a little bit more about pathways to healing and what I call the information gap. Specifically, who was targeted in raising awareness and fostering education? Who are you targeting with that education? Who are you targeting with regards to raising awareness?
La première partie,
when we implement the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th every year, our first objective will be to work hand in hand with Indigenous communities. We will begin with consultations with Indigenous groups, with groups of survivors, with elders, and we will determine what the best way to implement the day will be. We will decide on fund allocation and so forth, and that is how we will try to assemble all of the ideas and implement them countrywide. But the first step is to engage and consult with Indigenous communities and groups to see how they want their history to be told.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense because unlike my colleague, Mr. Bolaris, I didn't learn about residential schools at all when I was in school. And so the education gap was there. And of course, these are not stories that are being told in the media, frankly. I had a good conversation with author and journalist Tanya Talega recently. And she said, you know, it got to a point where she created her own production company to make sure that the stories of her people were told because there was such a gap. So just wondering more about engagement with the communities. The way it's set up, it is not top down, but bottom up, because there are distinct Indigenous nations across Canada. And so that is a very, very good thing. But I'm wondering, with this engagement, how children are involved. Are you involving children who no doubt see themselves in these 215?
Thank you for the question. We will start when we do the engagement. First of all, one of our principles will be a distinction-based consultation. So we will make sure that we include the Métis, the First Nation, and the Inuit in those consultation. With respect to kids, again, we will work with Indigenous organization, elders, survivor circle, and other group to see how they want to be consulted. So maybe I will turn to Melanie and my colleague Mandy to see if they want to add something to this question. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm afraid I would just be repeating just that initial consultation to ensure that that we're taking all of the considerations into account.
I've got nothing to add at this time. Thank you.
That's no problem. Wondering how vision has changed following the 215, and as my colleague Mr. Baptiste mentioned, 130 residential schools across the country. We know that there will be more, that the 215 will be followed by many, many more. What the vision is now and how that might have changed with this discovery.
So, just to clarify, thank you for the question about the vision and the events that are shaping what that might look like. The vision with respect to the National Day.
With respect to the National Day, yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. It's the thinking is that with this, in fact, increased attention right now, that we will be able to amplify even the first official day, this September 30th. So, in terms of the vision, I think that it was a very tragic event that's made it that's raised all of this attention. That's actually going to be capturing people's interest for some time. That we hope to hear more voices about what this day means to all Canadians, and we will see. And in fact, for us, the vision would be to listen and understand what people want to hear, and we have that attention now.
Thank you, thank you, Ms. Ian. Mr. Champoux, for 2 minutes.
Mr. Champoux, for 2 minutes and 30 seconds, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I really want to thank our witnesses once again today. This is a very important, difficult subject today. Earlier, I heard department representatives talk about funding from Canadian Heritage and the $40,000 that was allocated for the Healing Garden and ended up discovering the gravesite. This was a fortunate discovery, and I hope that you agree on that. I think all the resources and energy possible must be invested to help Indigenous groups continue to discover these sites. And we do not know how many more will be discovered over the coming months and years. Earlier, my colleague Mr. Boulris mentioned education we received on Indigenous history. He and I attended the same school system, and it is true, when we were young, in the school system, we heard mostly about Indigenous folklore than the tragic realities. Today, our eyes have been opened and we know more about residential schools. We have discussed this on the committee as part of our conversations on the National Day for September 30th. And we were saying that that day must contribute to correcting the situation, for righting some of the wrongs. It cannot just be another holiday for federal public service. The day must be put to good use. What do you have in mind? Because the 30th of September, I mean, when we think about calendars and planning, it's just around the corner. So what do you have planned to ensure that that day is effective, will be effective at raising awareness and increasing education on the legacy and history of residential schools?
Oui, merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. Yes, the bill that received royal assent on June 4th represents an important day and an important step in our reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. As I mentioned a bit earlier, the first step will be consultation with Indigenous communities. Because what's important is to determine how they want that day. Yes, we just have 2 minutes. I don't mean to be rude, but I will interrupt you. That day has been planned for months. What do you have planned concretely for this year? Well, for this year, concretely, we will hold a national event. We have already been working with Indigenous organizations, the NCTR, for example, and APTN, to carry out a Canada-wide event. Afterwards, and in parallel, we are also working on a consultation plan with Indigenous communities. And that will help us to see what we will do in future years to celebrate September 30th. Thank you. Mr. Bouleris, for 2 minutes, 30 seconds, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just take this opportunity to say 2 things, and this isn't necessarily addressed to the witnesses again. So, Bill C-15 on UNDRIP reached the Senate. So, the main justice of the Supreme Court, who's also Governor General, I want for him to know that let's hurry up. We want to be able to finish this process that was kicked off by my colleague Romeo Saganash. And also, we know what's happening with the Court Challenges program for compensation for children, Indigenous children in foster care. Now, a question for our witnesses. We've been discussing a program to raise awareness about Indigenous history and residential schools. Tell me more about your planning when it comes to funds and particular communities. Because in each region of the country, the reality was not necessarily the same. There were only 11 residential schools in Quebec, and that doesn't take any responsibility off of Quebec, but there were very numerous residential schools across Canada. Is the funding allocated based on how many children went to each school, or is it 10% per province? What is your plan?
Merci pour la...
Thank you for the question. As I was saying earlier, the first phase will be a consultation phase. It will be a distinction-based approach. We will work with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. After that, we will have a better idea of how the funds will be allocated, inaudible for the interpreter, to ensure that the funds are distributed across the country. At this time, I'm not able to answer specifically whether it will be based on population numbers, but that will certainly be part of our conversations coming up, and it will be done together with Indigenous groups and survivors. Thank you for your answer. Do I have time for one last question? We've been talking about cooperation. So what is your plan when it comes to cooperation with provinces? Right now, we're focusing on cooperation with Indigenous groups. There is not a specific plan regarding provinces. Great, thank you.
Okay, merci beaucoup tout le monde. Because we started late, I have about 5 minutes here left. I don't normally do this, but given the conversation that we are having and the importance of this issue, if anybody has any quick questions, and I mean very quick, for clarification or something of that nature, would you know before we end the meeting? All I need is a virtual show of hands if someone would like to ask something. Okay. Folks, I just want to say thank you very much. I want to say thank you, big thank you to our guests here today. Emmanuelle Sajou, apologize for the internet inconvenience. She is the Assistant Deputy Minister, Sport, Major Events and Commemorations. Also to Melanie Kwong, Director General, Major Events, Commemorations and Capital Experience. And joining us from Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, Amanda McCarthy, who's Director, Resolution and Partnerships. Now, folks, this is the first half of a motion that was put forward, as I mentioned, from Mr. Waugh. The other half is regarding Chief Casimir, who wanted to be available, but she could not be available today. So we are not done with this particular, that part of the motion. So therefore, we'll have to make that up when we return, and it would have to be after Monday, whenever that may be. I won't presuppose when that will be. So nevertheless, anything further to add? Nope. I just want to say thank you again to our guests, and I want to say a very special thank you to our colleagues who are guesting here today, as well as my own colleagues. And I want to end by saying thank you and have a bon fin de semaine. Have a great weekend, everybody. Big wish.
Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.
Thank you very much. Bye.